Okay.
We're working together.
Call to order the Blues Brothers, June 19th, 2018 meeting of the Planning Board. All right, Monica, everything on our agenda that's on our agenda?
Yes.
All right, so we'll go through in the order. We tried to make it in the order of things that would be quick first, so no pressure, but be quick if you're first. All right, bond release, 254 Great Pond Road, Thomas and Nicole Friel.
We received a letter requesting the release of the remaining bonds associated with the construction of a single-story addition and deck. And they submitted the required documentation, which was a certification letter from the architect and engineer stating that the construction follows the plan that was approved. And also they submitted an as-built as well, so they followed all the requirements. And so,
And you looked at it, it's okay?
yes, I went out to the site, it looked good.
I make a motion to approve all remaining bond for this project, 254 Great Pond Road.
Okay, motion to release the remaining bond funds has been made. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, we don't need to roll call this week. Excellent. All right, that's approved. So $4,000 back. All right. Continued public hearing, 1429 Osgood Street, Oliver Enterprise, application for site plan review, special permit under sections 8.3, 10.3, 10.31, and 16 of the North Andover zoning bylaw. Welcome back.
How's it going? Bridget Souza again with Allen and Major Associates. So the last we left, we were sending a letter to the Board of Health to try to get approval for a tight tank. That was denied, but at the same time, we looked into what the septic system would be if we went with the existing building program, which is about 1,900 square feet office space and the remaining warehouse. So that made the septic system much smaller, and based off of that, we made changes to the plan. We were able to move the location to where we found some of the best soils on the site, as well as some of the best groundwater depth. And we also reduced some of the parking counts, but overall left the pavement area as it was. As the uses for a contractor yard. We also did take away a couple parking spaces to increase that rain garden area over here. Previously there was none over there. This was able to be enlarged a little bit, as well as this rain garden here. We also had submitted a draft response letter to the peer reviewers for TEC and for Horsley Witten. All of TEC's comments that we had received were still applicable to this revision of site plan. So we had responded to all of those. There are a few items that we still have to address, like such as adding a couple details to our plan set. But we wanted to make sure that we got a draft. For the Horsley Witten peer review response letter, we'd done a lot of the calculations that were requested, but with the revisions to the plan changes, we have to recalc some areas. Just double check the drainage calculations. So we will be putting together a revised drainage report for that. And that will be submitted as soon as we have it ready.
Is the plan that we have now what you're showing us here?
Yes,
That's been
we
what's
had submitted 4 plans. I believe it was a site prep, the layout, the grading and drainage, and the utilities.
And these are what you're currently going to go with now that you have the limits of the septic figured out?
Yes.
Okay. And so, can you tell me again what the uses are gonna be, and what do you envision now with this plan? So,
So, we're gonna run our business out of this facility, we're gonna store materials in the back and the left-hand side. Our office will be in the front. We're gonna do so the usage will be that. We own a construction company, we store a lot of stone products, so we're gonna set up bins and store that product.
so not you had talked previously about maybe renting some of the space out with the
We're not gonna do that
with the
anymore.
limitations in space, it's just gonna be for your use?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
You know, and as you use, you think stuff through and you're going over your usage, you get small real quick. So we decided that we would just take the whole building, which would simplify the septic and,
Yep.
you know, a lot of other things.
Okay.
Just wanna get started.
Yeah. Okay, so, when do you anticipate, having these additional calculations, responses?
Well, most of the calcs are done for the drainage report, except for the areas, so I'll be working on that this week and into next, so we should have something to submit, a full plan set and a revised drainage report by the end of next week.
All right, before we go to any board comments, do any members of the public, have any comments? Okay, no public outcry, that's good. Any members of the board have any questions, comments?
Yeah, and this is a new septic system, right?
Yes, the existing septic is not, it's failing, so.
Yeah, got it. And where would the new one be located?
So that's gonna be up in this area. There's 2 trenches, they're approximately 60 feet long, 2 feet wide, with the reserves in between the trenches. We have test pits scheduled for next week, with the Board of Health. So we're going through those steps to,
How close are you to getting that approval?
we still have to complete the new test pits. We can't use the ones that we had already done because they're in a different location on site. So we are scheduled for next Wednesday, the 27th. As soon as those are done, we'll be putting together the final septic plans and submitting everything necessary to the Board of Health.
Shifting gears a little bit, are you now, based on the use you have, are you gonna make any changes to the exterior of the property?
Yes, we're gonna do a kind of a new facade on the front. I've already pulled a permit to do, we're gonna stucco the right and left side and the back. And we've already done the base on that. We stripped all the old fasteners off the building and the paint, and we have it prepped with stucco. We can't
okay.
finish it until we get the roof on. So we're gonna plan is to do a new roof, obviously all new site work and landscaping.
Yeah.
And then the front, we have mock-ups of the architecturals that show, we're gonna do like a metal, you know what they did in the DPW building in North Andover?
Yeah.
We're gonna do something similar to that, not those bright
Okay.
colors, but. it's a
Do we
kind of a-
have you given us that? Just,
Yeah.
okay, good,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
Yes, are those from your initial meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
We're trying to work with, the building is obviously, you know, it's a square box, so we're trying to do something that kind of fits the architecture there now.
Right,
So we're gonna do like a full wood around the doors and a metal panel and put more glazing in the front. Try to dress up the front quite a bit.
yeah,
And then on the sides, where no one sees, we're just gonna, you know, put something simple up, a stucco or a waterproof membrane and then paint it and all like that.
yeah, got it, okay. How, close is the nearest residential structure to this?
Well, so Mrs. Barker lives, I think she's the closest house, so that's probably, I don't know, 500 feet away. She's on the farm.
Okay, yeah, I'm thinking more, maybe it's the places that are further down, but there's a couple of subdivisions that have been built over the last 15, 20 years, but
Yeah.
I think they're further down. The only reason I asked the question is there's a likelihood that lighting or the use would be visible by any number of
So
houses.
before I bought
Yeah.
the building, I went to those 2 cul-de-sacs that were built in the
Yeah.
back road there, I forget the name of the street, but, so they're quite a ways away.
Yeah,
You know, there's plenty of woods in between. I wouldn't be worried about lighting, but the noise I was concerned about.
Is that Settlers Ridge Road?
Maybe. What's that main road that runs off the Kettle Pizza building off, Osgood? It runs like, I think that's right on the
Bradford?
border. Is it Bradford? Yeah, Bradford Road. It runs off
Bradford,
that.
so then you got Barker, and then you got Settlers Ridge, I think is the closest.
Yeah.
That's
can
not
we
pretty far down.
see, I'm just trying to get a sense, and, you know, and I'm not doing it to be difficult, but it's more along the lines is when we do commercial, the one time sometimes get ourselves in trouble is where it's relatively close to a residential thing and we haven't thought through that in advance.
Yeah,
And,
right.
you know, and I think we can, you know, I'm just trying to see if there's any required mitigation, like a fence or like a berm or something like that, or even some screening. I don't want you to do it if you don't need to, but, you know, if there's any logical reason why you might do it, maybe we should consider it now.
Yeah, so the one good thing about this, so this whole property's sunk down, which is why we're in the
Oh,
middle
okay.
with the septic, so it kind of sits in a little gully. So there actually is, whoever owned the building before or built it originally, there's a 5-foot-high concrete wall here, so the grade is higher.
Oh,
And then
okay.
all
From there
around
to
here
that
and this
wall,
side
Steve
is
Woods.
all burned up. So we kind of, like I said, sit in the middle,
So,
so as far
okay.
as noise reduction, that helps.
So, yeah, and, yeah, okay, and like any, yeah, okay, got it. Okay.
And that was my concern too, when I
Yeah.
bought it, I wanted to make sure no one we'd own the building and move it, and we do the same thing there, so we were kind of
Yeah,
trying to be cognizant of that.
Just looking at the map here, it's a quarter mile from this to the closest house on that street behind, and it's heavily wooded in between.
yeah, I mean, that far, you know, if
Yeah.
you said 500-600 feet, I'd say
Yeah.
we may want to think about it, but over 1,000 feet, I think is plenty.
1,450 feet.
Yeah, I think that's fine then. Yeah.
Not, you don't plan to do any tree clearing or anything like that?
No, I mean,
No.
right now, the existing trees are kind of overhanging. I don't know, maybe to trim some of it back, that's about it, but we're not removing anything.
Okay.
Just to be able to drive by it on the property line, the snow plow and such, when the trees get weighed down with the snow, probably would require, like I said, a little pruning, but that's about it.
Oh, yeah, that's a good picture here. Okay.
Okay,
Anyone else
good.
have
Yeah.
questions? So our next meeting is July
July 17th.
17th, so do we think we could try to get the answers to anything that's outstanding and maybe have a draft decision for that date? And are there gonna be any reviews from any of our,
There will be, once
Agency,
health decides on the proper septic, then fire will chime in, because I think the question was around the back.
Yeah.
What was going to, if there were going to be any limitations due to the septic system. But with the new design, we will be probably receiving some new comments.
and I'm just not remembering, was there any Concom involvement, or did you already go through that?
We have a meeting next week with Conservation. Their concerns were with the stormwater mostly, so I'm hoping to wrap up the drainage stuff as soon as possible so that we have, so that we're prepped for that meeting next week.
Okay, so I think goal is to get all these responses and all the stormwater and everything lined up that we can hopefully take a vote on it at the next meeting. Okay, great, thank you.
Great,
Thank
thank you.
All right, 35 Dale Street, Jay Henshaw, Gibraltar Pool, application for a watershed special permit under sections 4.136, 10.3, and 10.31 of the North Andover zoning bylaw. Applicant proposes the installation of above-ground pool with soil cutting and tree removal within the non-disturbance and non-discharge zones. The project is located in the R1 zoning district. This is a continued public hearing. We've had, I believe, 2 hearings prior to this. At the last hearing, I believe we had all the questions that the board answered, and we're going to look at a draft decision. So, anything to add to what we've talked about already? You don't have to.
No, the Jay Henshaw, Gibraltar Pools. I received a copy of the draft today and reviewed it, and I only have one question item on the draft I'd like to question.
Okay.
It's item 31, where
Alright,
it's,
well- Why don't we hold on that?
sure.
Let's see, since we're still at a public hearing, any members of the public have anything to say? All right. Do you guys, why don't you hear your comment, and then we'll go through the draft?
The only comment I have is the need for an independent construction monitor. This is a job that's very minor in nature, and I don't think we'll be on site, once the tree removal is done, I don't think we'll be on site for the pool building more than a total of 12 hours.
Okay, noted, we'll look at that. So we're gonna look at the decision now, and why don't you have a seat, and then if we have any questions, we'll let you know.
I would like to make a motion to close the public hearing on the watershed special permit at 35 Dale Street.
I think that's a good motion. Does anyone want to second that motion to close the public hearing? Do we have any more questions before we close the public hearing?
Second.
Second, all in favor? Aye. All right, so the public hearing portion is closed, so now we'll look at the decision. Thank you. Aaron? Monica, so I see in the procedural history number 4, and it says it's in accordance with sections 4.1, 6.3, and 10.3, but our notice also lists 10.31. So I think we should just add that just to be the same there.
10.31 added to number 4.
I had a question about the bond value here, because it seems like $2,000, that would be plus or minus 10% of the total cost of the project. And I understand protecting the town's interests, but also easing the burden on a homeowner that's going through the right process. I'd be in favor of lowering that.
Looking at a couple of prior permits, just to give you a little background, you have a in-ground pool, which is different, with a patio, shed, landscaping, and fence that was approved in 2014 on Great Pond Road. And the bond for that one was set at $4,000, just to give you a little context. We also have another permit that was approved a year later on Dale Street. That was approved for $1,000, and that consideration was given based on that, but that plan was for an above-ground pool with retaining wall and fencing as well. So just to give you kind of some figure as to what happened in recent construction with pools in the area. So we tried to kind of meet halfway.
Yeah.
Let's hold on. Let's hold that one. Let's see if there are any other potential.
Just on number 30, it reads, made out to the town of North Andover must be posted to ensure that construction, erosion control, measures and performance, should that be erosion control measures, no comma in the?
Yes.
So we'll talk about 30. We'll talk at the applicant's request. We'll talk about 31.
Now, I don't remember there being erosion control measures on their plan. I looked at it today, I didn't see that information. If it's there, pardon me, but if it's not, then maybe we should just get rid of that item. 'Cause if there's nothing on the plan, it seems kind of like a superfluous point to put in there, but. And then 33 and 34, look like the same item. Same paragraph. Are there erosion control measures that you are taking?
There's a proposed water line on the plan.
Okay, did you plan on putting any erosion control measures in there, though? I know there's a water line, but.
I don't think we're gonna need to, I don't think it's
No,
necessary.
that's why I questioned this, because from what I understand, you're just really taking a couple of feet and essentially
Pretty
folding
much.
it over to base,
Really, not even a couple of feet, probably
Yeah.
just about 18 inches.
yeah. So,
Okay, anyone else have ones that they wanna look at?
No?
Okay, so number 30, performance guarantee bond of 2,000. Aaron would like to make that 1,000?
yeah, well, it brings it down around like 5%-ish of project costs.
Okay,
I think that's reasonable.
anyone else have thoughts on that?
I prefer to keep it as it is, because the thing is, for two reasons. One is the reason why we're doing it is to protect the interest of the town and particularly the lake if there were a problem. So it's more like an insurance thing. It's not necessarily pegged to the value of the work that's being done. It's related to the value of the damage that could be pursued. I don't think there will be a problem, but remember, this money's only going to be out there for a month or two. It's not going to be out there for that long. It gets returned to the applicant when the work is done satisfactorily. So I don't want to start going real low on watershed special permits now, because they're one of the most, in my mind, significant things we do as a board. And I think 2,000 is not an unreasonable amount of money. If it were 10,000 or 20,000, I'd say, yeah, that's over the top, but 2,000 is not, in my view.
So I just offer that, the distance from here to the lake is a little deceiving because it's very close to a tributary, a stream, which is, like a HOV lane into the lake. So I think I appreciate, I'm glad you raised it, but I think I'd have to go with John on this one.
Jen, any thoughts? Yeah, I also, I think I'd probably lean towards 1,000 as well, but I think with the concerns that are raised, I think, and I haven't really heard any big objections, so why don't we leave, I think we can leave it at 2,000. But I think it is important for these to look at the bonds each time and not just kind of treat them carte blanche, so I think it's important.
I think the overall sentiment and that, Aaron, that you're pushing is that when you have small projects done by private citizens, we don't want the process to be so bureaucratic as to drive up the costs. And I'm super mindful of that. And anything we can do to even go faster on these things, we ought to try to do in general on these small projects. Because I think we can cover them with a minimum of like, I know people like my next door neighbor decided not to do something because he was aggravated by all the stuff that had to be done.
Or some people just do it without coming to the
Well,
board.
yeah, without coming to the board too. So, we ought to.
happened, I've heard.
We got to exercise common sense, and that, I think, is the bigger message,
So we'll leave 30, 31, I guess Monica, I don't know what your thoughts are, but I think I agree with the applicant. I'm not really sure we need an independent construction monitor for an above-ground pool.
What we could do is, I go out weekly to view sites. I could,
Yeah, maybe just.
It sounds like it might be just once, so you just gotta catch him while he's there, 12 hours.
Yeah,
The
it
rest
might
of us will just come once it's built.
Hold a pre-construction meeting with the town planner prior to construction, and just leave it at that.
Typically, on most projects, we do have an independent site planner just to make sure, especially in sensitive
Yeah.
areas, that they're not.
I think for this one especially, we do have a pre-construction meeting must be held. I think that'll probably be sufficient. So, okay, so agreed to strike 31, and we'll strike 34 as being the same as 33. Okay. Okay.
I remember looking at this earlier. It says the applicant shall submit an as-built plan stamped by a registered professional engineer. I question the need for that. As-built, without a doubt, but stamped, given the work, it just seems out of proportion. I don't know what a registered professional engineer would stamp there.
No, I think we always require that it be stamped, otherwise, someone kind of writes on a napkin, this is as-built. I think that's what makes the as-built plans official. So,
I have no issue with it. He's gonna
Yeah.
certify the plan anyway.
Okay.
He's gonna do it as
All
by
right, great.
stamp, so.
great. Okay, so does someone want to make a motion to approve the watershed special permit for 35 Dale Street as amended?
So moved.
a second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, you got your special permit.
All right.
All right, thank you for your patience, thank you for your work.
You can still come.
Still come on by.
Plenty of chairs.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All right, let's do draft master plan. Okay, so how this is going to work tonight, I think, if it's good with everyone, I think we'll start by taking any public comment that people want to make. So if anyone wants to talk about the process, if they want to talk about what's in the master plan, things that they really think are important, things that you think we should throw out, things that you question or you want us to discuss, have at it. And then I think from there, I think I would entertain comments from the board. And I know I have questions, especially on the first three. Or maybe we can go, what we can do after the, yeah, what we can do afterwards is just general comments if people want to make them, but then I was thinking of walking through, especially the goals for each one, and just seeing if we really have a consensus, or if there are any goals that we don't have a consensus on that we want to either change or eliminate.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe last session, we thought we'd take just a couple of sections
Right.
per section.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so with that being, any way we can draw the shades? I'm getting blinded, but I need your can I borrow your sunglasses? Okay, so if anyone from the public has any comments that they want to share on the master plan, please step up, introduce yourself, and make comments. And thank you in advance.
Hi, my name is Liz Armstrong. I'm the region coordinator for the Bay Circuit Trail. For those of you who don't know what the Bay Circuit Trail is, it's 270 miles. It goes from Plum Island down to Duxbury. It connects the greenways from some 40 different towns, and I have 6 of those towns from Georgetown down to Tewksbury, including North Andover. And my concern, and I am appreciative of the fact that you have something in the master plan about pedestrian crossings, but the Bay Circuit Trail is the trail in North Andover that cuts across most of the major roads. And I've been working for the last 2 or 3 years with a zero progress on a pedestrian crossing at Route 114, Berry Street, Harold Parker. That's a major crossing, very difficult. The distance between the 2 lights are 6.5 miles. So, and there's left-hand turn lanes or right-hand turn lanes the whole way. So there's no stopping the traffic. And I just hope that while you have something in the master plan about pedestrian crossings, that you really do put some teeth into it and try to prioritize the ones where real safety issues are concerned.
Thank you.
If I may, who have you worked with on that? Is that a state
Route 114,
activity
yeah,
primarily?
so we had, just to recap very quickly, we had all the Board of Selectmen on board. We had our state representative and our state senator. We had the DOT people. When there were some changes in personnel in the North Andover planning, everything just went to, right? So I went through that circle again, and then I finally sort of gave up after, no progress twice through the circle. So everyone knows about what we're trying to do, but we've made no progress. And so some of the places where the Bay Circuit Trail cuts across Salem Street, maybe we could put some lines in, some signs up, that's really, but some of the crossings are pretty treacherous. And the worst is at Route 114, Harold Parker Road. That is a tough, tough thing to get across, and we've just reopened a section on Farnham property. We have about a 95% greenway from Boxford State Forest to Harold Parker. So we have more bikes going through that now, because everything's off Sharpners Pond Road. And so we have a lot more pedestrian crossing, a lot more bike traffic that's going to hit that crossing. And eventually someone's going to get injured, because no one slows down there.
Oh, so people to continue on the trail need to cross 114?
They have to cross from Berry Street to Harold Parker Road, and the trail cuts right back in after you get across from 114.
Yeah,
So it's all in the woods, but
That's tough. That would be also a difficult spot to put a traffic light. So
One
that's
of the
tough.
things, the reason why I was interested in this level of detail is because I think one of the critical things that we have to do with the master plan is we have to create that bridge between the plan and then the implementation steps we're going to take in the future. And this is a good example of the kind of thing you would work down the road, and what's the best vehicle for
Right.
it? Should we have multiple subgroups through the town, or committees, or whatever you want to call it, to deal with issues like that, so. you know.
Right, because you can put in improve pedestrian crossings on Bay Circuit Trail, but to get to the details of what's important is tough. And
Yeah.
when it crosses a state road, that makes it,
Makes it tougher.
Makes it
Absolutely, and the
difficult,
fact that it's the three lanes there makes it even more complicated. We brought some ideas
Heavily
from rail
trafficked, yeah.
trails, across 97 and other things. But I think if it were, my job to try to get the master plan to be alive and to be a living document that you really can be proud of the accomplishments in 10 years, you have to avoid getting people so frustrated that they just quit trying to improve whatever area they're looking at. And that sort of happened to me. How many times can you go around this circle before you just say, it's enough, it's enough. You're not making any progress. So we think we did all the right things politically. We certainly had sources for funds from the Recreation Trails Program that the DCR have. But, so I appreciate the fact that it's in the master plan. I appreciate the fact that there's working with FONAT, which I think is a good organization that handles the Bay Circuit Trail in North Andover as well. I have their T-shirt, so I am a volunteer for FONAT as well. But I do think you need some teeth before someone gets injured on some of these crossings.
thank you. Helpful comment. Anybody else? Please, thank you, sir. Just introduce yourself.
Stan Limpert, 43 Stonecleave Road. I have a comment, and I'm not quite sure exactly which sections they fit in. Some I'm more sure about than others, but let me just tell you what they are, and I'll let you all try to determine where they might best fit. One thread that runs through this document is the revitalization of downtown, one of our pet projects. I would say, and I didn't see it explicitly mentioned, and maybe it is somewhere in here and I just overlooked it, but it seems to me a major element in that revitalization is the removal of the utility poles on the street. I know that's a project, but I don't think the town will ever think that we're serious about revitalizing downtown until all those utility lines and those poles go away. If I looked at all our competitors, Andover, Amesbury, Newburyport, look at their downtowns, no utility poles. So I just say that's a starting point for us to think about revitalizing downtown. One issue that's been of some concern to me is the increase in through traffic in our town. I notice it a lot in my neighborhood every day, and I'm concerned that we don't have current accurate traffic counts on some of the arterials in our town. So we don't actually have the data to know the severity of the problem and what that is. When I asked that question, I was told, well, we have some traffic counts. They're, recently, whatever that meant. I think we could certainly benefit as we think about implementing the plan for some more current data associated with what the load is on our roadways in North Andover, so we can make some more intelligent decisions, certainly in terms of land use. I mean, if you're going to start thinking about putting, housing or anything else in an area, you would want to look at the loads on the roads already and see what that's all about. So that would be my suggestion there, and I think that would just be very helpful for all of us to know really what the state of the roads are. And I think it's changed a lot even in the last few years. I perceive sort of my very subjective views that people commute through our town. They don't live here. They're going from one place on one side to another place on the other side, and they come through our town twice a day. And, that puts a load on our infrastructure, and also it's a safety hazard for everybody. It's like, God forbid you should try to ride a bike on Boxford Street at like 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. You'd be killed for sure. So, these are issues I think that you might want to think about incorporating in the plan just as a sort of a marker to say at some point we want to do this. And I've heard that the police department now has some technology that they're using for other purposes that may actually be useful to do traffic counts in some fashion or another. So, maybe it wouldn't even cost us any money to do it. We could just do it and figure out what those numbers look like. So that would be that. Like Ms. Armstrong, I certainly appreciate all the references to the Friends of North Andover Trails in this document. I think that's something that we all ought to be proud of. That's a great sort of synergy that I think the plan tries to create about the town and an organization that's trying to help with trails in North Andover and other things. I would be a little concerned, however, that that there is a truly shared commitment between the town and its efforts and the Friends and what it can do, because it is a volunteer organization after all. So you don't want to kind of load it up too much and expect too much from it, because that's a risk that the town runs. They'd love to do it, but volunteers come and go, stuff happens. So I think that's something that in the plan you might just want to balance when you get to it, between what the Friends can do and what the town can also do. And I think that's been going pretty well, but that would be a caution I would have. The one plug that I would make here would be for the Stevens Memorial Library. It got so little mention in the plan, it was sort of unfortunate. I was sort of disappointed that it literally is like 2 sentences in 180 pages. Arguably, it might be our only cultural institution, right? That might be it. So you'd think it could get a little bit more play than that. I'm not sure what that would be, but it might be something that could benefit from a little separate discussion, just to say, what else could we be doing to incorporate that somehow in the master plan, in terms of, what can it become to help the town move forward, whatever it wants to be doing in that area. So just something to think about. It just got so little reference here that, I was sort of surprised in that.
Actually, I'm glad you raised that point, because I think that sort of you could broaden that perspective a little bit, is that, how do we use all the cultural assets that we have in the community?
Exactly.
Are we completely leveraging all of them to the best we can? And I think it gets, there's hardly any mention in the plan, I think, as well, about sort of schools and education and so forth. And to some degree, that generally is because it's not the focus of discussion in the plan. But I still feel there's probably, some things that we should think and do, because, I would go a little bit further. I would say that we have, and I know there's a representative from Merrimack here tonight does very well, but Merrimack is like an outstanding resource we have in the town, and I don't think we anywhere come close to leveraging it. And I don't mean depending on it and, in a way that's parasitic, but in terms of it being a win-win. People forget that the traffic circle in the old center got designed by Merrimack kids, and so that's what I mean. There's a lot of things that could be done that would really benefit the town if we looked a little bit more broadly. So,
well, and to pick up on that theme, Mr. Simons, it happens every time you build a new school, right? So when we built the new high school, right, in 2004 or whatever, we all said, well, the auditorium will be a community space, and the weightlifting room and the exercise room will be a community space. And of course, now, 10 or 15 years later, that didn't happen. But the plan could go back and kind of think about that in terms of community resource, right? How does that fit into the community's view of what it has available to it? And try to encourage now the school department or whoever you need to encourage to make that resource available for the community, and not be too jealous and kind of holding on to it all the time. You can understand scheduling things, and they got a lot of stuff, but, it's just almost an attitude that, you'd like to have people think differently about the resource. And, we don't have a lot of those resources in town. We don't have a Collins Center. We don't have things that we can use. Even though, Merrimack has wonderful facilities, they have them scheduled pretty much flat out too. So I think it's a good topic worth further discussion. And that's why the library, there's kind of no mention of culture. The heading is culture, but there's no mention of culture in that. So, you could just add a few ideas about that, and that might help, people to think a little bit about that. I'm very I'm very encouraged by the sort of the sub-plan to look at the historical assets of the town. So I think that's going to be interesting and enjoyable. And I'll be interested to see how that happens, you know. As a member of the Historical Society, more than happy to participate in that, and I think that will be a good resource for our town. The only thing I would say, kind of, you know, just a random editorial comment, that one section, Section 8, Historical, Cultural, and Natural Resources, I think got a little long-winded about the historical stuff. I think that could just be a little compressed. It's sort of a disproportionately large section in the document, and it goes on and on and on, talking about all the wonderful.
Wherever the Historical Society is staying to take it easy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I read enough. I got that. You know, as we used to say, put it in the appendix. You know, get it out of the. Put it in the appendix. Wonderful for an appendix. You know, it's just it sort of breaks up the read of the document because there's a lot in there. Whereas other sections have a lot of hard data, you know, that is useful in there, like in the facilities section, for example. There's a lot of hard data. It's a long section, but it has a lot of good information in there. The only other suggestion I have is in the implementation tables. If you change that, let me just go to one and see if I can make this work here. If you look at the headings
Can
of
you tell us
those.
what page that is? Maybe we can pull it up.
It's just, pick any one. This is a generic comment.
Well, let's all look what are you looking
Pick,
at?
do one for historical. So I'm looking at page, let's say 21, right? Or even, yeah, in the tables, right? Or 20. Look at page 20, right? Sorry, my bad. So if you look at the column that's fourth from the right, it says local government partners.
Hold on a second. That's what
Yeah,
that's what I'm
210 in
looking
your PDF, right? Yeah.
for. It is, yeah.
If you look at that column, it says local government partners. I
213.
would respectfully submit that you could expand that to say local government and community partners, you know, because reference in that column is FONAD, at least on one instance, and that's not a government organization, clearly. And that could then allow you to include things like the Historical Society where appropriate, if you wanted to. So if you just expanded the heading to say local government / community partners, then you could include other kinds of organizations. It could be athletic booster organizations for some things or something. And it's a nice way to sort of acknowledge that there are groups you're trying to pull into the process. So I just offer that as a suggestion in sort of a minor editorial way. But it might be an opportunity to get more people involved. And then, of course, you just have to figure out some, you know, acronym reference for them in the bottom here. But I'm sure that would be easy for them to do. So. Overall, I think the consultant has done a wonderful job, and I think they've really met the challenge in boiling down all the comments they got. So I'm sure that was no easy task. But I think this is great going forward, and I'll really be interested to see what your thoughts are on how the implementation of this will go and what that plan will look like.
And I think that's something we'll probably talk about, if not at the next meeting, at the one after that. We will
That'll be
definitely talk
interesting.
about that. And just to call an audible, when we're done with our public comment, I think I'll have, before we talk, I think I'll have the consultant come up, if that's okay, and we'll ask questions and make about some of these things, or we can do that.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Anybody else? Please step right up. Wherever you're most comfortable. Most comfortable.
Yeah. My name's Judy Ferris, 31 Oxbow Circle. I think they've done a great job pulling the plan together, but I do have just a couple thoughts, food for thought for you guys as you consider this plan. Secondly, I didn't know about the 114 plan and the crosswalk, and so living out in the Owl Country, as it was called. I really appreciate learning about that because with the development that's happened around Colonial Ave and 114, that is a nightmare to get driving in and out. So I can't even imagine what it would be like for a walker or a biker to cross 114. And that has traffic studies that have been done, but it's clearly that area is a nuisance to vehicles in all regards. So that's one piece. And in that regard, I didn't see anything in the plan that specifically, and I may have missed it, spoke about the 40B housing. I saw 40R mentioned and the overlay district, but I didn't see 40B. And it's my understanding that we used to have an area that was designated as 40B housing and that the state allows you to do that. What has happened on Berry Street is that massive development that we now have cut through folks coming through Colonial Ave out to Old Cart Way to Boston Road to get to 93. That's a huge traffic nuisance for the residents that live in that area. And at the last board meeting where we were talking about another issue, one of the zoning board, I don't know if I said that, one of the zoning board members said, look, we're going to continue to approve big developments at our discretion until somebody in this town tells us that we want to maintain our population at a certain number or we want to grow to 90,000. They're going to take that. They're going to just do what they want. And that's not the exact words, but you can watch the film and you can see what was said. And that was extremely alarming to me. And they had closed public comment at that time, so we couldn't rebuttal that comment. So that's a major concern. So that so I see it up there, so that's good. Whoever's working the computer is good.
So one of the things, there is a section, obviously, as you see, about 40B, but a lot of the housing affordability discussion, which doesn't necessarily talk about developments, talks about other ways that we can increase our supply of affordable housing.
Yep.
Because if we get above the certain percentages, then we have more leeway as a town in saying no to 40B projects, whereas now, if we're under the quota, we have very little to no ability to say no to a project, whereas if we use some of these tools that are suggested to increase our housing affordability, whether that's inclusionary zoning or other aspects, we become less controlled by the state processes under 40B.
Right, and that's my concern, and that's where I think years ago when they were first looking at Berry Street, the zoning area for 40B housing had expired, so the builders were coming in and just taking any piece of property and using 40B.
I think, if I may, the 40B is a highly nuanced thing, but basically, the essence of it is it can override local zoning.
Exactly.
But there's not a limited area within the community where it's allowed.
But you can,
to
it's my
exist.
understanding that a town can do that. And I'm not an attorney, but it was my understanding that North Andover had done that in the past, but that plan had expired.
I don't think, no.
And that the
I
state-
think if you're getting that from the ZBA, that's not.
No, not from the
Yeah.
ZBA, from the state and from other towns that do this. So again, it's just, I'm not an expert, you guys are the experts in my opinion. So I'm just throwing it out there as maybe something to look into, and if you want me to do the research, I'll be happy to go do
No, I
the
mean-
research. But it's just, I'm not looking for a debate necessarily, I'm just saying, it's my understanding that other towns do have an area that's specified for 40B housing development to try to control the state coming in and saying, look, you have to let them build, because that's what happened at Berry Street, and we have this massive development, and we have major drug deals going on there, we have all kinds of things happening at that development, and there's nothing we can do. So we have to, I think, as a town, as part of this master plan, to make sure it's clear to the zoning board what our expectations are, who we want to be as a town, so that they can use it when they're making their decision. Because it was really kind of a very concerning meeting, and maybe some of you heard about it. They approved something to go on the little lot next to the Prime gas station by a 3-2 vote. And in order to, for the vote that they were taking, they were supposed to have a 4-1 vote. And they passed it, and one of our residents found out, and that's a state law, and one of our residents found out that it needed to be a 4-1. So there's questions there that I have about what's happening and what we can do to try to guide them, and that's a separate issue. But so just food for thought on that. And then And just, I want to second Stan's on the cultural partnerships. You know, we had that print museum here that's now gone, but that was a huge, I think, loss. And the schools, the elementary schools, I don't feel really took advantage of that, walking the students over there and showing them what the history was of print. And so I think that's an example of why you want to make sure you want to do that. And then my other comment is about community resources, and Stan was talking about the high school, is if there's any way that we can bring different communities of people together, like seniors and students, we should try to do that, because that is, I think, the way of the future, to try to give the seniors an opportunity to share their knowledge and help the children, try to keep them young. So I think that that's in there, but I just want to comment on that. And that's it, so thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Kafori, welcome.
Thank you. I just wanted to, I think, address maybe a couple of those issues. I believe the plan she was talking
Just
about.
introduce yourself
I'm
to
sorry,
everyone.
problem. Eric Kafori, Community and Economic Development Director. I believe the plan you were referring to was a housing production plan that had expired in 2012. But that plan just, and so two things on that. One, the plan doesn't necessarily, it lays out the community's goals, objectives, target areas, and how they're going to achieve hitting the 10% and address affordable housing issues. It doesn't necessarily 100% prevent anything. There are objectives or thresholds you kind of have to meet. The good news is the Planning Board and the Board of Selectmen, at the recommendation of the Planning Board, has just approved a new housing production plan that is now going before the state for approval, which I just wanted to point, so we are addressing those issues. And there was one other I was going to bring up, but I think that was the big one.
And to that point, one of the, which we'll get into later, one of the goals, I believe, is that in the housing and demographics talks about trying to coordinate the housing production plan and the master plan to be on the same page, which I think is a challenging, but it's a good goal, and so that is also recognized in the master plan, those two things working together.
Great. I know what it was. Real quick, underground utilities, it is something we are pursuing. We are in the process with DPW and working with the utility, but the town has approved it. We are moving forward. It will take a while. It's not an easy thing to get, all the utility companies, but they are putting it in their system for the engineering, the design, and all that stuff. I just have no idea what that time frame is, but I wanted you to know.
Just when you get to that point, you gotta let everybody know so they can get all excited about it. Even if it's 5 years out, I mean,
Yeah.
tell people it's not gonna be tomorrow, right?
Yeah, it won't be tomorrow. So we just did.
For those of us who lost our power yesterday, we'd appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lisa Roberts, 31 Burgess Lane.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Surprise, surprise, I'm here about cell towers, but I love the trail talk and the open space talk. Library talk, really, it was a great thought, and quite honestly, we should look into partnering with the Andover Library and other town libraries, and I know we already do with the consortium. I go there instead of our own town library because I find the resources there far outweigh the ones we have here. So I think it would be an asset to start looking at other towns to partner with these things. But as a nod to his utility talk in downtown, I'll bring up cell towers. But there was only 2 mentions in the plan about them, and I really hate to see us be so reactionary to them and be more proactive. We should look at some spaces that would work for neighbors, neighborhoods, and plan ahead and designate certain areas. And as Elizabeth just mentioned, work with other towns, because the boundaries do not abide by town lines. They go over them. So work with Boxford, work with Andover, other towns, because I know Andover's in the middle of battling a cell tower too, right in the middle of a residential neighborhood. So I just would like to make sure this isn't overlooked and that we plan for it, look at spaces that are more appropriate than in someone's backyard, where the neighbors have a say and input on, yes, this would be okay with us. We recognize that we need cell service here, and this would be okay, not here. because wasn't worked with the neighbors before, so that makes sense. Is there anything else I need to do to encourage this?
No,
You all know me very well.
we'll let you know as the implementation phase takes over.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, so why don't we have Eric come on up, and now we'll grill you. So why don't we talk about maybe some of the comments that we've heard, and just kind of if they've been considered, if the reasons they're not in, or things that we could add. So utilities, it looks like that's been discussed. Are those? I'm not sure I really saw a place for utilities, but why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, in going through with the committee and also with Gene and Eric, we talked quite a bit about that. Certainly desirable, expensive, challenging, time-consuming, as Eric just mentioned. If we were going to put it in there, there's a place where we talk about, it's either an economic development or transportation, where we talk about the different types of improvements the town might want to consider from an infrastructure, streetscape, beautification perspective for downtown. So that could be an opportunity there to include that.
Yeah, even a line about, I mean, I think it is a laudable goal. I think Stan's right that, having underground utilities, where the, power doesn't keep going off, that is essential to a really active downtown. So yeah, if even just a line or two just about that, I think would be.
Sure.
I don't think it hurts, and I don't think there's anybody who's gonna be like, no, so I think that's
Probably
good.
not.
But in terms of power outages, that you bring up a good point, and I'm not talking about downtown,
Right.
but in terms of a master plan, we've had incidents over the past few years where we have had significant power outages. And is there a place in the plan to carve out a goal to work with National Grid to figure out if there's something better we can do to work with them to minimize those power interruptions? If it affects the whole community, seniors get hit hard by that. Well, everyone.
Yeah, infrastructure, I mean, I don't know, to me that does go to infrastructure, just to, we've had people that out of power, 2-3 days, and a couple times over the last winter, and it seems to be getting worse. So, again, I know that we're sort of limited in what we can do when it's National Grid, when it's, it's more of an executive function, but the more people talk about it, the more likely it is to get done.
Yeah, I encourage discussion if there are possible steps that we as a town can take to almost aid National Grid in that effort.
Take down all the trees in town. The problem is at some point you do get into conflict between your goals. I'm joking a little bit because I think you can get in between,
that's
but that's,
definitely the case.
Yeah.
The trick is to design that elegant solution that tries to weigh that balance.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Traffic counts, that was one point that was raised.
Yep, so Stan is 100% right. The traffic counts that we have through MassDOT, that the town has gotten from different developments over time, they're spotty at best. It's the case really all over the state for the most part. I don't disagree with the comment that if the town has some way, or they can partner with the Merrimack Valley RPA, they probably have traffic counting capability as well. I know at least the Boston MPO has that capability for their communities. I don't think it's a bad thing. So I'm happy to, if you all want to and agree, I can try to fit that in somewhere.
So that's possible. We'll leave that as a discussion. Where would you think that would fit in?
In the transportation section.
Okay, so when we get to
That's chapter
we
4.
can talk about that in chapter 4, transportation. Okay. Library. I actually very much agree with that one on the library. I know my kids use it a lot, but it's much more than just like taking out books. A lot of the books you're taking out are just taking out ebooks now these days. So I think, and then especially in the next 10, 15 years, libraries, there already are, but are being transformed into something different as I think kind of extends like more cultural, more getting together, offering services, you know, whether it's, you know, toddlers coming into play, whether it's seniors, whether it's, you know, job hunting and working on resumes. I think something about the transformation of the library into the, you know, into this newer model is important for its survival.
I was at the FinCom meeting the day that the library director presented, and it absolutely blew me away for exactly those reasons. What she said was, the need for space is greater than it's ever been because it's all predicated on programming now. And so in many respects, you say, well, we don't need the shelves and everything, but you need space for the programs and the activities and everything, which is, I hadn't really thought of that, you know, and that's really true. So, yeah, I think more of an emphasis on that, definitely.
And I think we should give a nod to the library too at how well they have transformed themselves because, like Lisa said, I always used to bring my kids more to the Andover Library because it seemed like their programming was better and a little bit further developed. But I've found myself now, particularly on Saturdays when I'm running from one soccer field to another and have an hour in between, we always stop at the library in town, and they're fantastic, and they're constantly reinventing themselves and really bringing in a lot more of that programming, particularly in the kids space where I tend to spend more time. And they've done a fantastic job, but I think it's important to note what they've done and sort of that we want to see that projection keep going.
So yeah, maybe, I think especially the library, you know, even talk with them, getting some information about what they've done and adding that, I agree that it's a strong cultural resource and it should be highlighted.
And I think also the fact is, when we look at our cultural institutions, we should even think more broadly than the library. I mean, I think that, you know, we have, Merrimack's the obvious one, as we mentioned, but there is Brooks School. I mean, even the fact that we have the Stevens Coolidge Estate in town. We have Windrush Farm. I mean, there's so many different, I think, quasi-cultural institutions that we don't fully take advantage of, and there is a real opportunity there.
Right, I recall that in the plan there was some discussion of like doing something to highlight different businesses and stuff like that. But I think we could do something too similar culturally. Other small cities and towns that I've seen have, you know, created cultural maps of different places in town. You know, like historic, you know, so you could, you know, the Parsons Barn Art House. So just little maps of downtown showing different places and stuff like that, which just kind of highlight some of the cultural aspects with some of their history. Just even small things like that might go a long way just towards everyone knowing about it. And then, you know, the schools can use those for trips and stuff like that. I think just getting that information out there would be helpful as part of this as well.
Okay.
And you can cut down the historical portion and add cultural. So 2 birds. What else? Cell towers facilities. Do you want to talk about that, Eric? And is there a place to kind of put some thoughts on? I'm
trying to get out of the sun.
I'm there.
The only person that has sunglasses, I was trying to get
I'm about ready to use it.
I think that could go to, again, infrastructure. I mean, we do talk a lot about infrastructure, but I think we've had a lot of discussion here, certainly about not only placement of cell towers, but using different types of technologies. You know, the small cells versus, you know, just maybe even just a kind of a broader statement about addressing cellular in a proactive manner in terms of both towers and various technologies.
So I was just trying to,
I did a search. I didn't find the word cellular. I was trying to.
yeah, it may be,
There's one reference in the implementation table, I think page 24. 181.
yeah. So at the top of 181, actual page 181, I'm not sure what it'll be in the PDF because I'm working with the Word document, but yeah, I purposely tried to keep it general, just because of when we were developing this, the discussion that was ongoing with the planning board at the time. We were trying to be sensitive to that and how the decision was going to come out. Again, happy to change the language to sort of fit now that that's at least temporarily behind the town.
Have you seen that conversation going in other communities in terms of trying to map a way forward in the master plan for mobile phone facilities?
Usually treated fairly generally about increasing coverage if coverage is spotty, trying to do it in a way that's sensitive to, the visuals from nearby neighborhoods, trying to put it in proper locations.
But I don't think, that's all, to be honest, that's all in our bylaw anyway. I think the more important point is not just sitting back and waiting for the next project and voting yes or no. The more important point is saying that we want to proactively seek out technologies and seek out partnerships. And because if we do that, we may or may not avoid a controversy in the future. But I think that that other stuff to me is all a given. It's already part of the bylaw. So I think what we could put in there is something, it's still general, but it's something that we could implement later on in some sort of other smaller group of how to proactively seek out improved cellular infrastructure and technology. It could be as simple as kind of like that.
It's number 85.
Number 85, page 85?
No, number 85.
Item 85.
Page like 20.
Okay.
Page 22 or something.
Let's see.
Same wording in both places, so
Okay.
the implementation part's not any different than the text.
Okay. So if I'm hearing your suggestion correctly, I would then swap out the bullet point recommendation on the top of page 181 to the suggestion of the planning board about proactively seeking out new technology and working with partners or providers to expand access across North Andover, something of that nature.
And we include other communities as well,
Yeah.
because I think it's a little bit short-sighted to just assume that if you got North Andover right, that you'll be okay.
Let's just make, if people are going to comment, that's great. No, you can comment, but you need to come up and introduce yourself just so that we have a record of it. So comments are encouraged, just in that way. Okay. People thoughts? Yes.
Great.
Okay. All right. So I think that was most of the public comments. So why don't we go to does anyone have any general comments they want to make, or someone else? Someone in the back?
Do you mind?
No.
I wanted to pick up on the library comment. This is not a funding document, I know that. But to
Right.
the extent that things are overlooked or included, helps encourage people to put money certain places. So if the library wants to offer better services, to the community, underemphasizing it doesn't help, right? Because then the town government looks at the library and goes, I don't know, it's not in the plan. Why do I care about that? So to the extent that, you all, in the with the auspices of the plan can, say that would be a great thing for our town if the library offered new services and partnered with local other town, whatever. The other thing I was just remarking at the top of that page 181 that we were just looking at, it's talking about trees, right? And an organization that was not included anywhere in this, that used to do that exclusively almost, was the North Andover Improvement Society. They were all about trees. And they had a meeting last night, and they were discussing how that landscape is changing, and a lot of it's being driven by the power companies who want to eliminate all trees on our highways because they don't want them to fall on their wires. So there's a real trade-off between stable power and beauty. And that's something that, as a community, we need to be thinking about, because they want to, people used to like that sort of arbor-like effect that where you'd drive down the road and there was beautiful trees, you're in a tunnel of green. Power companies hate that. They want to eliminate that completely. So, something else, there could be a trade-off, and it's another organization, a community organization, the North Andover Improvement Society, who might be able to, again, be part of an implementation activity that would talk about that, shade trees, beautification, and all that. Just something to think about. Thank you.
Come on up.
Hi, I'm Christina Minicucci. Hi, Eric. Eric, could you just answer a quick question and really explain a little bit the difference between the master plan document itself and all of its, the pros that we see in there PROSE, and what the implementation plan and how that's, the words are shorter and that's, it's a little more concise, and kind of what the difference between those two parts of the document are.
Between the matrix and the actual
Yeah, the
written
matrix in
document?
the back and then the other
Yeah.
180 pages.
Yeah. So the primary difference is the 180 some odd pages is all the content and the background information that hopefully lays the foundation for why the goals and the recommendations are suggested in the format and manner that they are in the plan. The implementation matrix, which is at the end of the document, the intention of that is to really be more of a checklist and a way to organize in a hopefully shorter manner versus what's laid out in text format in the primary document.
Cheat sheet in the back.
Basically, yeah. It also talks about partners and potential timeframes and things like that, which aren't discussed in that length
Yeah, to me,
in the written
to me,
document.
it's not a replacement for the content, but it's a way that, 220 pages is a lot of pages to go through
Yeah.
one time, let alone, in the future. It's a way to cross-reference and go back and forth in a kind of easier manner.
Yep.
I think it's really well set out. So, okay. Does anybody else want to make any comments, or you want to jump into kind of the goals? Jump into goals? Okay. All right, let's jump into goals. If anyone has any comments as we go, let's just feel free. So, Monica, why don't we start on, I'm looking at page 29 of the PDF. This is land use goals. So we'll try to get through, we'll see what we have time for, but we'll start with land use goals and we'll go from there. This is the first major section, right?
Yeah. I picked the first three are the heaviest.
Yeah,
Land use, housing, and economic development.
they're just the order they're in, so you
Yeah,
put them
oh,
in
no,
that
it's
order.
on
You
me,
did
not
it.
on you.
All right, land use goal number 1, focus new development in locations currently served by adequate public infrastructure that encourages the reuse or development of existing buildings or land. So number 1 is review the Osgood Smart Growth Overlay District, OSGOD, and update the zoning bylaw to ensure the district encourages the types of uses that are attractive in today's market and consistent with the direction of this master plan. That sounds good to me. It's not very specific, but I don't think it should be that specific. It's just to review, to look at that one.
Yeah, you're right, because they could go in dramatically different directions.
Right. I think the point of it is that that's something that, because it's like one parcel, most of one parcel, and because it's, kind of in Osgood Landing, it's kind of left as just, okay, that's their parcel, but I think it should be reviewed to see, is that working? Does anything need to be changed? I don't know, that's one I don't think we have answers to, but it makes sense to look at it. All right. 2, create a new base zoning district for downtown North Andover that's consistent with the goals of the master plan and encourages and incentivizes reinvestment. Should include but not be limited to. Replace the existing downtown overlay district and general district with a new base zoning. So, thought there is just, well, Eric, can you just tell us a little bit about that?
So when you have the general business district and then you have an overlay on top of that, it gives choices. Those choices may or may not be in line with the current thinking of the master plan, which is to encourage a mixture of uses, including housing over potentially commercial space or commercial over commercial. Maybe adjustments to the setbacks, adjustments to FAR limitations, lot coverage, parking. So when you're given 2 options, if one, say the overlay district is more maybe favorable to the type of development you may want to see in downtown versus general business, there's nothing stopping someone from coming in under general business and doing something that may be less desirable than what you could do in the overlay. So our suggestion is maybe you get rid of the overlay and restructure a new downtown that is what you want, so that there's not the choice there anymore. It's, this is what we want, we're telling you what we want, and we're going to make it as easy as we can for you to do what we want.
And is the idea then with the next bullet to extend what the current overlay district is by picking up another piece of it and having that be included in the base?
Yes, yes, so not only would it be what we would suggest along with the staff and committee, would be to take what's existing under the overlay, but then expand it, as you mentioned.
I would just that was confusing to me in the way that it was worded, and where you're saying replace, and the first bullet is like get rid of the overlay, and then the second one is expand the overlay. I would just maybe reword that to say, and pick up within that base zoning district this additional. I agree, I understand the concept, and I think it makes sense. I just think the way it's worded is a little confusing.
So it'd be more in the same bullet to say something like replace and expand?
Yeah, exactly.
Something like that? Okay.
Exactly.
Great. Makes sense.
So the essence of these are suggestions for how to maybe deal with the downtown zoning with new zoning, which encourages mixed use. I mean, that's the bottom line, how we get there. These are different suggestions for how we get there.
Yep.
I mean,
So in some cases in the master plan, there'll be sub-bullets like you see here where we tried to go a little bit deeper just to provide some additional detail to the town as they move forward instead of leaving it as you guys figure out how to do a new base zone. So we tried where we could to add a little bit more specificity.
Let me ask you this, because I honestly think in the case of North Andover in particular, but I think in many places in general, there's sort of an element of chicken and egg. And by that I mean, you could lay out all sorts of zoning for the area, and you could say, look, it's here, come build. But you're actually, believe it or not, in better shape if you get a few really talented developers coming in and said, this is what I want to do. Build the zoning around that. In many cases, you end up with a better outcome. And, you know, that's risky to some degree, I grant you that. But the point ends up being is we almost, if you lay the zoning out, I feel like sometimes it's a little bit too much tops down, and I feel like there has to be a bottoms up element to it that's based on what really creative thinkers in the market is going to bear. So I don't know. I struggle with that one every day, frankly, but, you know, I didn't know if you had any kind of places we've seen where they've dealt with it elegantly.
It's a great point. I mean, there are some communities that prefer the sort of PUD method, if
Yeah.
you will, where you do have folks who are coming in, they're assembling land. If they want to do something of size and scale, they're assembling land, especially in a downtown environment. They come in and then they suggest, and then, you know, if you have a willing and able planning board or whoever if it's a special permit, whoever the granting authority is going to come and work with that developer. In other cases, you know, I think I would suggest it might be better, maybe politically or from the perspective of residents who have put their input into this, to say, we listen to you and we think that, you know, this is the type of downtown that you want, and then try to build something that responds to the public, but also responds to market realities, and it's going to encourage the type of development that you want. So, I mean, I agree with you, John. I think you could do it either way. We're suggesting one way. If that's not the way the planning board wants to go forward, you know, we can change it.
The next one is focus new development and zoning changes along key commercial corridors that may be more appropriate for higher density mixed-use development at key nodes or intersections. I didn't have any particular comments on that, other than it, you know, it does make sense to keep looking at those, which I think we do kind of on a routine basis anyway. Anything else? No? Okay. Can you talk about the future land use map? I was a little bit confused about, is that conceptual? Is that what you think an actual zoning would look like? I was just a little confused by that.
I think what we tried to do was just to try and graphically represent locations in town where we heard from the public that they'd be comfortable seeing additional development of one form or another, or locations where the town may want to think about either consolidating zoning districts, or the case of downtown, maybe creating a new one. So that was our attempt at trying to just represent the text graphically. Most master plans, I think, that I've seen include some form of a future land use map as kind of a guiding graphical representation of how the town may want to move forward.
I would just simply say what's on the screen is existing.
That
Yes.
one now, but-
Yeah, that's existing.
So if we go down.
Yeah.
Yeah, these.
Yep.
Yep. Right, this is the conceptual.
And again, we try to bubble diagram it out, not do a sort of parcel by parcel representation, just because we recognize that, you know,
So this is
things
more
may
just,
change.
this is what's kind of the feedback you got about what's envisioned for these areas, not necessarily particular zoning changes or anything like that.
Well, it's definitely a combination of both. I think it's
Okay.
where we heard from the public, they'd either like to see preservation, and I think particularly in the case of 2 and 7, or growth areas in the case of 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, along a lot of those, either the downtown or some of the major commercial corridors.
See, I guess the one of the problems I have is that for 5 and 6, I heard diametrically opposite views on those, right? Some people were like, yeah, let's develop all those, that's where we need to be, the development for mixed use, that's where we need to have our commercial. And some people say, no, I don't want this to look like, 114 in Peabody, I don't want any more development. So it was hard for me to say that there was really a consensus on, especially on that.
Mhm.
And so I guess I'm just struggling with what to do there. I mean, in terms of these future land use, someone looks at it 10 years from now, you probably see, okay, everyone wanted this, but those ones, it wasn't really the case that that's what everybody wanted. Some people did, some people didn't.
Yeah, I think there was some consensus in downtown too. I could probably say something similar, that some people don't want to see housing.
Right.
A lot of people do, some people don't. So this is our attempt at trying to represent, I think, both what we heard and what we think makes sense, and what the committee and staff, think makes sense throughout all of our different discussions too. It's not just the consultant.
Okay.
Can I make one, this is another little clarity point on the map itself and the key to it. I find it a little confusing that the key is not in the same order as the numbers. This is gonna sound weird, but the first one is the downtown district, which is number 3, and then the gateway district, which I think is number 1. Could you just put the numbers on it, or?
Oh, like what's being shown on the screen
Yeah,
right
in
there?
the box on the bottom, it's just not in, and that might
Yeah.
just be my very organized self,
No, that's
but-
fine.
Yeah, numbering, you want to match it up,
Yeah.
you're right.
Or if we put them in order.
Yeah, because I just find
Yeah.
myself going back and forth
Or
and trying
even
to,
even put the numbers next to the colors, yeah.
I have another annoying map thing later on, so I'm sorry
Yeah.
in advance.
No, maps are meant for clarity, so you go to it.
Anybody else have any comments? Hold on. Land use goal number, okay, so land use, anyone else on land use goals number 1? Okay, goals number 2. So this is page 34, yep. Review the current zoning bylaw and compare the current regulation to the desired vision and goals of the master plan. That seems to make sense. Simplify and consolidate the number of zoning districts. Yes, please. Review existing lot size requirements and dimensional regulations for residential districts to determine if they are consistent. Again, that's a broad one that I think that makes sense, but what were your thoughts on that? What are we looking for there?
Do you still like 1 and 2 acre zoning?
And why? But I guess for the members, but why? What are the benefits and costs, I guess, of changing that? So say we lowered the lots, what's gonna happen then? And say we increase the lots, what's gonna happen then?
Well, you'll create some nonconformities.
So it's more, I guess it's more in terms of density?
A lot.
Density?
You will be able to potentially increase the density on whatever remaining developable parcels are out there, which I think, as we discussed in one of the previous planning board meetings, there's actually not a ton. So maybe the better way, to deal with that would be through the cluster, reformatting the cluster bylaw, so it makes more sense in terms of its applicability to the different residential parcels that are actually remaining.
Yeah, it seems more like, that might be appropriate. If we reduce sizes, there could be more subdivisions and stuff like that, but even then.
I think there was a logic, there was actually extremely coherent logic about how we ended up with the 4 districts we have today in the 1 to half acre, basically, and 10,000 square foot. It was all sort of well conceived about why you'd want to do that. You're right, if you made it smaller, you would just end up with, in the remaining footprint, a lot more houses, and then you would have a lot of god-awful infill stuff over time, because what would happen is somebody would have a lot, that is now, like, somebody would have a 2-acre lot, and if you downzone it to 1 acre, they would start carving their property in half, and you would have all sorts of weird lots, so, but the point I wanted to get sort of back to is, I think we're actually at a point related to housing that's more critical. It's almost, we have to come to realization about this, is that if you assume there's certain areas that are most logical for single-family housing, and let's assume we keep the zoning the way it is now, is I bet the build-out of houses, single-family houses, is probably less than 1,000 if you took every piece of land that's undeveloped in town and built houses around. I think it's relatively small. And maybe 1,000 is not right, but it's a relatively low number. So what that means is that virtually all the housing development in town that's going to be built in the future is going to be multifamily housing. I think a lot of people have not come to grips with that. It's taken me a long time to realize that, because we think of North Andover as a suburban community of single-family houses. And it's going to shift for a lot of reasons, and a lot of good reasons, because as people get older and demographically change, a lot of people won't want to be in single-family houses anymore, but it will change. And if we do it, we have to do all the things we need to do to make sure that that happens, right? And, you know, and I bet if you went and polled 10 people, they wouldn't even think that. And, you know, and that's what we have to be prepared to accept.
And I agree with that.
Yeah.
I guess the nuance I might add to that is that North Andover will still remain a heavily single-family community, and I think the character of most of the community in terms of its acreage and developed area will probably remain the same.
Yeah.
It's just there might be parts of the community, and it's happening already, that are sort of entering into redevelopment mode, as many of our suburban communities are within close proximity to Boston, within an hour of Boston. So I think what we tried to represent in the master plan is where should some of the preservation of the community character take place, and then where are appropriate areas where whatever size or scale the town chooses to go with, but multifamily or something other than single-family development happens. And that seemed to be, kind of in the area where it's already happened, where we are now, and, along 114 or 125 or up by Osgood, on Osgood, and not necessarily in areas, 2 and 7 that were highlighted in the future land use map.
But to your point, John, is if there aren't those developable lots now, if you're going to have, if the desire is to have more single family, you may have to decrease lot sizes, or they're just not going to.
That's possible at some point.
Right. So otherwise they'll stay the amount that we have, but how many subdivisions have we had? I don't even know if we've had any in the last year or 2 years.
No, we have. Frankly, it's really since the mid-90s, the late 90s, there really have not been very many. If you look back over the last 15 years, probably and pulled the building permits for single-family houses, I bet the number's pretty low. And I think all in all, it's a positive impact of the change. I don't think it's a negative thing, but we just have to be prepared for it and manage it appropriately. So,
Okay.
I think we get into, like more nuanced issues of, it's not just height, but it's height and location, and, it's a lot of things that we're going to have to deal with that we haven't really thought about as much as we will have to in the future, I think.
Well, I think one of the points that was raised, and I don't know if Jennifer raised it or someone else raised it, is we talk about all this of building up in downtown, but if we put, and I'm probably tops on the list of mixed use downtown, I think that's a great plan, but if we put too many new residences in one places, that overburdens certain schools and and utilities and public services in one area. So, to the extent that we want to circulate those, kind of burdens, at the same time we have to be mindful of, where there's room to grow. So it's not easy.
No.
So John, do you think the wording in this section of the master plan is helpful in sort of guiding us and the community to come to grips with those issues you mentioned? Does this give us a good direction?
I think in general, it's okay. I may want to go back, I may defer that because I have not parsed the language finally.
And there is a housing portion
You
later
know,
on, but
but I do think that, you know, setting the right long-term context is important, so we don't get surprised by things that happen, yeah.
And I think you make a great point about the change in the composition of housing, that, you know, people who spend time doing this can sort of see that.
Yeah.
And so making sure we have something here to try to guide how we prepare and plan for that, it's a moment of opportunity.
Yeah.
so let's go on to land use.
And in
okay, sorry.
particular, given the incredible tenure of your service, would really be great to capture some of that in here, I think.
Okay, so that's something that we can maybe look to see if we can find a place for. We'll go to land use goal 3, ensure natural resource protection. Establish a lake and watershed oversight committee. Peter, I put you on the spot. Do you have any thoughts on this? 'Cause I wasn't sure about the utility or need for another committee, but I kind of deferred. You have a lot of watershed knowledge and involved in some of this. Do you think that would be helpful?
Well, I actually think it could be, and part of the reason I think that is, I think there's a sort of consistent view on that. If you go to the previous master plan, there's wording in there that, I'm not quoting exactly, but basically says that the town needs a sort of a structure of how does the town assess and act on the overall quality of the lake? And certainly there are elements that are involved. I mean, the water department pulls the water out, treats it, and distributes it. You know, the planning board acts on the bylaws for the watershed, and conservation has a role as well. But, I mean, if you go to the water department and sort of ask questions like that, it's kind of, well, we treat the water.
Okay.
And I'm not even saying that's a bad thing.
No, right.
They don't want to step out of their lane, because, you know, I think that's just sort of a natural thing, and they have a defined task. So, you know, I think the broadest sort of responsibility is, in many respects, the planning board for protecting the watershed. But even there, you know, we've talked for a few years now about, and I was really encouraged in recent meetings, people were starting to talk about quantifiable measures. Well, we've talked for a few years now about, are there measures for this board to assess how are we doing with respect to the watershed? And there could be. We have a baseline assessment of the raw lake water quality 31 years ago. We could compare that to today. Is the quality of that resource stable? Is it improving? Which might mean, hey, we're being too restrictive. Is it decreasing? I have no idea. And that could be a quantitative measurement for this board. But even this board, I mean, we've made a number of attempts to, you know, ask the water department, DPW, for example, can you give us 5-year, 10-year trends of basic measures of the lake? And we haven't really been that successful in getting that before the board. So I think that if you look at the prior master plan comments and then these examples, and I'm not trying to say anything's wrong, but I am saying that I think the town is missing a sort of functional process to get the arms around this resource, which has many different dimensions. So yes, I do think it would serve an important function. I mean, I share the concern that yet another committee, and we should really be careful about that.
So that's what my question was. Could this be a subcommittee of, you know, planning board or another board? But it seems like where it does touch on a lot of different areas, that it might be beneficial to have its own board. And I mean, I think that bylaw might have to be either through the board, would have to definitely be through the Board of Selectmen, but I think someone could spearhead that through the implementation. Okay, so I mean, anyone else?
I would welcome other perspectives.
Convinced me, so
Well, I'm actually not trying to convince, I'm,
But
yeah.
I look at it from the point of view of any well-managed community does a certain set of things. And, you know, you think about it, the remarkable progress we've made in terms of managing the budget and town managing the resources, doing a capital plan and stuff. And, I mean, it's really something to be proud of, but it's a reflection of this is what places that have their act together do. So one of the most important natural resources in the community is the lake, and it even extends beyond the community because water is the most precious resource we have. Why wouldn't you do that? That's what a well-run place should do in some shape or form, and we can figure out how we do it, but we should be monitoring it. It's because once you get it up and running, it's not that hard to do. And then you can constantly see and answer all those questions because, you know, like we did this watershed special permit tonight. You're right, maybe we were too hard on the guy. Or maybe we weren't hard enough. We're not completely sure.
Well, what's ironic is there's actually objective, quantifiable measures that we could have that could really inform the board. And I've heard people comment on, hey, what sort of measures do we have? We could get those. And I love you raising as an example, John, the tremendous progress the town has made in financial management. I actually view the lake much less as a sort of a tree hugger enterprise and much more as an actual asset. Not just for the aesthetic quality, but, you know, we sell water, right? And if you add up the 4.3 billion gallons, it's a tremendous financial asset. And we're really good at managing, with the town has got really good at managing finances. The lake is actually an extension of that. And we should be applying good business practices so that the financial aspect of that asset remains low cost.
I mean, I suspect we're probably doing something right because the water and sewer rates have not increased.
I've heard that used as a measure before, and I guess my perspective on that is that could be what it means.
I think it's a secondary measure, it's not a primary measure, but it probably correlates with those other things. if you
Most
have
places
them.
I've seen their rates go up every year, so I think it's definitely impressive.
Yeah.
Maybe we've gotten lucky and had a good system already in place, but I think it's a good measure. Okay, well, why don't we move on to housing? I think we'll try to get through housing, and then we'll stop after that and go to Merrimack College, and then we'll decide if we want to come back. But this is a good discussion. I think it's helpful. I hope it's helpful for everyone. But also don't want to be here till midnight. So let's go to page. Sorry, scrolling. Everyone gets the page for the goals for the housing.
You know what, actually, before we get to the goals.
Yeah, if you have comments.
Yeah, on page
please.
37.
Let's go to page. Let's go to page 37. The map.
Sorry, and I told you I had another map comment.
Yep, map comments.
Just because I'm hyper aware of this because my son's going to be going to the new Brad Street School. This map has the old Brad Street School as a school here, which is no longer a school. And so just because you're flagging the schools, it's probably something that should get fixed.
Yeah, we use the state's school layer, so it gets updated when they decide to update it, but,
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially where they sort of are going to go by the same names, it's a little confusing, so.
Okay.
But, and on that, I don't know, I mean, so we just approved at the town meeting funding and this new plan for the new park and the athletic fields. It may be worthwhile to just highlight, the upcoming athletic fields where in between the middle school and the Brad Street School might be good to actually highlight where that's going to be.
On this base map?
Yeah, it's going to exist in, 2 years. So I don't know if we could highlight that as, going to exist or future athletic fields.
I also thought that the maps in general are pretty helpful. And
Yeah.
they're really, I think, well-done graphics.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So let's go to page 63. PDF page 63.
Page 63. Oh, why don't they not?
Does it have page numbers?
Yeah,
It's actual page 61.
got it.
Okay. Review the recommendation from the regional housing plan for consistency, prioritize. So we talked about that earlier. I think that just makes sense. Update zoning to ensure that deed restricted affordable housing is provided as a component of new market rate residential development. So this is inclusionary zoning. I don't know if anyone has thoughts on that.
You know, again, I probably don't understand the concept completely as much as I should. But the one thing that I would say is I would not want to get ourselves into a bind where, let's just say hypothetically, a project comes up that is a high-end residential project. And if under inclusionary zoning, mandatory inclusionary zoning, it says, okay, you have to have one of the units is inclusionary. I feel like to some degree it's a one-size-fit-all thing. I'd rather have that combined with like transfer of development rights or something like that, so that we achieve the goal of what we're trying to do, but we don't create like anomalies that just don't make sense.
So often the way I've seen it is you can, if you aren't going to do the affordable unit, you have to make either a payment in lieu of taxes, or you have to make let's say for every unit you don't use, you have to make $100,000, just throwing out a number to the Affordable Housing Trust or something that can be then used for affordable housing. So if you're not putting it in your property itself, there's some way where you're making a contribution to affordable housing, which can be used in the town. That's the way I've seen it other places.
It's interesting because when we did Edgewood, that's exactly what we did, so. Yeah.
Right. So that's the way I've seen it, is that you have the option, and sometimes it's based on the percentages. You can do, a middle one, you can do a low one, and depending on what you do and which ranges you choose, depends on what mitigation or extraction you have to pay to avoid, or you can just do it and get the benefits of the statutes. Fair enough?
Yep, I would suggest having a payment in lieu. Or in some cases, I know the town of Brookline, obviously different than North Andover, but they allow off-site units.
Right.
The units to be built off-site. The city of Boston, I think, does the same thing.
Oh, in city, well, that even takes it.
Yeah, so
Right.
there could be a project
do
somewhere
somewhere
else in
here.
North
Yeah.
Andover, and those units
I
could
can
be
see
built over
something,
there.
another place in North Andover is a logical way to do it,
Yeah.
but, one or the other, as long as there's some level of flexibility, I'm fine with the approach.
It just depends what the community wants. Does the community want units? Or does the community want the money to then do what you want, with the money somewhere else to either, maybe you want to take that money and build some other type of housing that's not being built in the community by the marketplace, or you want to use the payment in lieu of to then deepen the subsidy of certain units. So if the market isn't able to, say, do units that are subsidized at, say, 30% of AMI, usually it's like 80%, which is 40B regulations, you could then use that payment in lieu of to then deepen subsidy in other units, pay down the rent, purchase units, and then subsidize. So there's a lot of different ways to do inclusionary zoning.
Okay, so that's good. I think it's a good point. And this is general in the idea of having inclusionary zoning, which I think is good.
And it helps the community get it. I think what we heard earlier from one of the public comments, the goal of reaching and hopefully exceeding the 10% statutory 40B.
I often like having it as the payment where you put in, like, say, the Affordable Housing Trust, just because, just like you talked about with the CPA, with getting all that money together for the athletic field project, sometimes it's better to have the money when the right project comes along, rather than saying, okay, one unit here, one unit here, one unit here. It's better to, okay, let's save it all and we can put 6 units, or we can put 3 units and then give money to, offset costs for people who are, first-time home buyers or something like that. Sometimes it's just better to have the money. Okay.
Can I ask a question? Eric, just so, when you have an inclusionary component like this, how does that count towards your 10%? How do those units count? Like 40B, those units count towards the 10%?
Yeah,
Does this function the same way?
yeah, and I think I'm not a 40B expert, unfortunately, but I think you can petition DHCD to have them included.
So the inclusionary doesn't automatically get you.
Yeah, and I also don't know if it works like when you have 40B development, it's rental, like 100% of the units count. If you have the 20%, I'm not sure if it works that way if it's through inclusionary, but those units will count on your SHI.
Okay. Determine the supply and demand for senior market rate and affordable housing and plan for housing to meet the need. That's a good common sense goal. Identify financial and staff resources to facilitate the construction or preservation of affordable housing. Utilize CPA and housing trust funds to offset housing costs for households at the lowest income brackets. Okay, those are all seem like very kind of big picture affordable housing goals. All right, let's go to page 64, PDF page 68, housing goal 2. Limit the construction of large tract subdivisions and encourage smaller cluster of housing with an emphasis on open space. Can you talk a little bit about limit the construction of large tract subdivisions? I mean, I think we already talked about that. I'm not sure that we really have room for that many as it is, but what's the goal there?
Trying to recognize the comments that we've heard throughout the master plan of trying to, limit the number of sort of 2-acre subdivisions or 1-acre subdivisions where they're applicable or possible, which I know is sort of limited, but it's just our way of trying to acknowledge that we heard that and people are interested in trying to preserve open space where we can, by encouraging probably through some form of smaller cluster development, which as you read through the next bullets,
Okay.
you'll see that.
The one I wasn't sure about was work with the Department of Public Works to identify locations where the expansion of sewers can encourage. I'm just not sure the town really works that
We're
well.
sort of past that, frankly, in North Andover. It's that I think you have to go back really 25, 30 years where that was sort of a relevant issue. In fact, the best single example that I can give related to that was the whole, if you go out, South Broad Street where the soccer fields are, that I'm not sure people know that what we did there was North Andover had cluster development, Boxford didn't. The land where that is used to be in Boxford.
Oh, really?
It's now part of North Andover, so we ended up preserving like about 50 or 60 acres along South Bradford Street, but in order to do it, we had to move the town lines because Boxford doesn't have cluster because they don't have sewers. So North Andover could do cluster and the sewer ran down there. So that was a case where that actually worked, but it was only because there was a developer with Tubsarico was willing to do it. So I think there's cases where that exists, but frankly, there's, most areas where are sewered in town, I mean, at this point.
It seems to me that though, this is kind of, it seems most of the time you find the developments are there and then you figure out a way to get this. It's not moving the sewers out first and then finding the developments, at least I'm not seeing that as real feasible, I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, it's a little bit, remember tonight we saw the commercial presentation about the sewer, and going down on 120. The problem is there's a chicken and egg about who's going to pay for the extension of the sewer into commercial areas down there, but that, it ends up being more of an economic issue because nobody wants to pay for it unless everybody's willing to pay for it, so.
I'm just wondering if we need that particular bullet. It seems it's not a big deal, but I guess there's a lot to do in this master plan, and that doesn't seem like something that we need to do.
Yeah, I don't think I could see taking that out.
Yeah, I would just consider taking that out. If there's a strong reason to keep it in, maybe let us know, but I'm not sure I see the need for that one.
What I say is when this comes out, what strikes me as being missing from these goals in the housing plan is the sense where it feels like we're really moving towards multifamily units as opposed to single-family housing. And that raises a concern for a number of people about how does it impact the services in our community. If you're going to dramatically increase, not one or two houses at a time, but all of a sudden you're gonna have many units. And I know we've seen a lot of information here about the population trends and whether or not that will impact schools or not. But what is missing from this is having that ongoing conversation about how do we think this is going to impact all of the resources in our community, particularly schools. Because as I read through all of the really useful data in this plan, the biggest population groups in our town are either people with children or children in the school. Like, those are 2/3 of our community are parents with children in the schools for children in the schools. And so when you're talking about putting large multifamily units in town, and whether it's in one neighborhood, this cluster development idea, whether or not it's going to dramatically increase school population overall, you're certainly talking about an impact on particular classrooms, on particular schools. And I think it's important that to the extent that these conversations are happening, that these other community services and need to be taken into consideration, and that there need to be communications between the different stakeholders and the different people who are thinking about different issues. And sewers is just one of those particular issues. Schools is top of mind for me because my kids are in big classrooms, as I've said over and over again this year. I know it's not the case across the town, but I think there are many other issues, like how do you do garbage collection if all of a sudden there's a big giant thing, right? Like, I just think that there are a lot of different stakeholders and services that get impacted when you put larger developments in place. The traffic issue that was raised earlier tonight. And if this is the way the development is moving, I don't know that we can stop or prevent that trend, or that we should, but I think we need to be mindful of those other pieces, and I don't see that in any of these goals.
The interesting point that you raised, and I hadn't thought about it until you started making your comments, Ms. Les. What we've seen in our public schools is not a change in the overall enrollment, but we've seen a dramatic change in the demographics of the students we still have at the same levels. What we've seen is what the educators have called free and reduced lunch, people at the lower end of the economic spectrum, and that may in fact be the result of multifamily housing. So let's say our enrollment stayed the same, flat, but the services now that you need to provide to students changes dramatically because there's all other kinds of things going on. You know, they're probably multilingual, there may be language, you know, so it's interesting you say that because that may in fact be driven by the multifamily housing availability in North Andover, which is changing now. And if you continue down that path, it maybe not, it won't have an impact on overall enrollment, but the students that you'll have to teach now will be totally different than the ones you would have taught 10 years before. So that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a real slippery slope when you get into that argument, and I don't think that it should be an economic barrier to entry into our town. But I think that the point is well taken, and another thing, this town has a great reputation for special education, and so some people will move here because they want those good services for their kids, and that changes the services and the amount of services you have to provide. All of those things, you know, it's a school committee issue, it's not our issue, but I think that they go hand in hand, especially when there's been such a big conversation in our town over the past few years about how do we reduce class sizes, that this is an issue that, you know, the ability to, you know, the reason we're building a new kindergarten is to free up more classroom spaces so that we can hire more teachers, so that we can bring the class size down. And it seems a little disjointed to me to be having that very public, ongoing conversation at the same time that we're having this discussion about, you know, bringing in bigger developments. I think they need to, whether or not the impact is real or as people perceive it, I think those conversations need to be held together.
I agree with that.
So can we put potentially a bullet point in housing under goal 1 to review and evaluate the impacts of the master plan or diversification of housing on existing town services and infrastructure? I mean, I think so. add that. I think we have the data, I think is pretty, is a lot of the data is there, but to, if we start putting in different bylaws, inclusionary zoning bylaws, the accessory use bylaw, which I definitely want to add, what impacts, if we change zoning to encourage it different places, what impacts is it going to have, and we should try to measure that and account for that. So I think that would be a good bullet to add to that. And Eric, if you think there's a better place to add it, that was just the place I kind of just see that it might fit. After we talk about how we're using funds in different places, to actually review what we've done and how it actually impacts what we have now.
Yeah, it's actually a
good point.
Better spot than where I was thinking, so I can put that in there.
Score 1 for me.
Do you mind if I back up just a scotch? No, within this topic.
Within this topic, yes.
Is the desire that people stated for open space driving the need for cluster development? Because I know in my comments when we had that big open house, I kept saying, I love open space, I love open space. But my desire was not for cluster development. My desire was, and I know you need money in the town for more open space, maybe the town to buy more land for open space. So is the only way you guys see to get open space to do cluster development?
No, that's just within this topic. I think open space there's a topic regarding open space not related to housing later on.
Yes.
Okay. I was getting scared with the cluster development.
It's both. It's part of it.
We've invested a lot in open space.
Yeah.
And, and certainly from my perspective, we want to continue to do that in the future. I just would be careful that there are some cases where cluster zoning accomplishes the same goal. The example that I gave about recently is that we ended up getting both in that case, as we got a tremendous amount of open space that we would not have gotten otherwise. So don't think that cluster doesn't help in some cases. If there's going to be development of property, it's the best way to do it in most cases. But you're right, it shouldn't be a substitute for buying property when you have a chance.
I was just confused because I know you were talking about how the trend seems to be going toward not single-family homes, but duplexers and something like that. But I know that the houses for sale in my neighborhood disappear like that. So there's definitely need for single-family homes and not duplexes anymore or multifamily.
Yeah, we're talking more about development, so it's those
Not the
single-family
demand for
homes,
it.
you're right, are
That's why
selling.
it's going so fast.
they're
There's
not
no
too
new
much
supply.
building.
That's the reason why they sell so
Right.
fast. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
great. Okay, we were going to go to, I think we're talking about housing goal 3. Update the town's zoning bylaw to promote a mix of uses in areas already served by public infrastructure, such as downtown Route 114, Route 125, and Sutton Street. Okay. Accessory dwelling unit. So for those who don't know, an accessory dwelling unit, some places it can be called an in-law apartment. It doesn't necessarily have to be in-law, but creating a bylaw that allows for creation of spaces as part of or in connection to already allowed residential units, small, and just trying to come up with it's a way to keep people in their homes and offer homes.
I agree with that in principle, but I'd be very careful for numbering. First of all, we already have one. But secondly, I guarantee as soon as we do something like that, that people will use that as a workaround to build extra units that are large and out of scale. I mean, one of the battles that we had probably in the planning board about 10 years ago was cases where in the R4 district around the library, those areas, people were building these hideous duplexes and calling them in-law suites, and it was just ridiculous. I mean, but they got away with it for a period of time until we closed the loophole down. So anything we do, we think we need to be careful about the implications and we don't create unintended consequences.
So I agree. I think so far in the bylaws we've written, I think we've been pretty meticulous. But I think with college kids or after college kids coming back and living with their families, with parents now coming back to live, part of it is going into these small multifamilies or downsizing, but another way to keep kind of people in their houses is creating these units, and it's a way to keep some, sometimes things affordable, but I agree that it has to be carefully drawn. So So it's we'll keep it in there, it's a good idea, it's just one we're gonna have to work on. Okay. We comfortable kind of staying there and taking up economic development on the next date? All right. Okay, so I think we'll continue the public hearing on the master plan till July 15th. Anyone who wants to make comments on that day, we can talk about things we've talked about today, things you want to talk about coming up, and we'll focus on some of the remaining ones that we haven't gone into the goals. And yeah, if we could get something to look at, maybe hopefully by then on what we've talked about, that would certainly be helpful. Or if you want to wait, do you think it's better to wait till the end?
Gene and I were talking, I think it was after the last time I was here, about how to, because there are, I think as I mentioned, a couple of outstanding
Yep.
items that staff and the committee wanted me to address. I think Gene's suggestion, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but was to almost do them as little mini amendments so you could kind of look at
Yep.
each one. So if that makes sense, I'm happy to start to structure what we talked about tonight as well as the remaining items to bring to you at the next public hearing in July.
I think that would be great. All right. All right, I'll be the only one here on the 15th. July 17th, thank you, July 17th. Okay, so we will move on to new public hearing, Merrimack College, 315 Turnpike Street. Mr. Schwartz, thank you for being here. This is an application for a special permit site plan review under sections 8.3 and 10.3 of the North Andover zoning bylaw. Applicant proposes the rehabilitation of existing parking lot along Ahern Road between Turnpike Street and Sullivan Hall. Mendel Science Center consisting of the repair of existing pavement, revised lot and drive layout, and conversion of 130 overflow parking spaces into the reconstructed lot within the R3 zoning district. That sound right?
That sounds right.
All right.
So,
Now, you were here last time, got a sneak preview, so
Yep.
why don't you tell us about it?
great. For the record, my name is Felipe Schwartz, Associate Vice President for Campus Planning and Facilities at Merrimack College. Thanks for having me again. I'm here before you under a special permit application for site plan review for basically a parking lot reconstruction and expansion project. And I think you've summarized it very well. When we were last here, you had asked us to look at a couple of things that were supplemented within the application. They were dealing with vehicular patterns and traffic, landscape and lighting, fire department input.
Could you just, since this is a new public hearing, can
Oh,
you
sure.
just give us just
The full overview?
just not the full, just a brief overview so we have it on the record and so that anyone who might want to comment hears about it.
Not a
and then
problem.
can get into what
Yep.
we asked about. Thank you.
Sounds great. So we're looking to expand and reconstruct Lot C on campus. And Lot C is situated along Route 114 in between Sullivan Hall and Mendel Hall would be its boundaries. This is currently a parking lot that serves predominantly our academic quad area. We see a combination of faculty, staff, commuters, and even some visitors. The screen shows it now. This is a parking lot that's been in its current configuration for several years. I would say about 5 years ago, we introduced some parking down the middle of this area. And then over the last year, we've started to park on the grass areas around this particular parking lot to help serve the inflow of students and faculty and staff and visitors that were using our new academic building, Crow Hall. So this is almost a beta test. Parking on the grass was a beta test of looking at demand of how parking operates on this part of campus. We understand how it happens in our residential areas. We understand how it happens around our campus center. But with the new 50,000 square foot academic building, the grass overflow parking area was an opportunity for us to gauge the demand. Obviously, if you've driven past it during the school year, you saw the demand was there. So this is really an opportunity for us to formalize that parking. There's roughly about 127 spaces when we count the grass areas that people were parked in. We're about 123 paved now, including handicap spaces associated with the Welcome Center area. The Welcome Center area is also a part of this project. It's the middle building, which is actually the McQuaid Library, and our Welcome Center is within that building. So this really gives us an opportunity to formalize that parking and not only provide better parking, but also create an actual parking lot. We're actually also able to create a wider two-way traffic lane for a fire department, any other emergency vehicles and trucks that traverse campus from one side to another better. And we also introduced some streetscape elements with additional sidewalk along the building side of the project. So rather than having folks walking through parking lots all the time, we provide an area that they can walk from basically one side of this plan to the other on a protected sidewalk that's lit. So that in a nutshell is the project. We still maintain our path to Royal Crest and across Route 114. We alter that a little bit, but for the most part, that path remains as is. We also introduce additional landscaping. We're introducing trees along 114. We have a couple that would come down with this project because we do encroach toward 114 a bit with the project. We also add in approximately 14 to 15 new light fixtures along this project area. As you know, the Mass DOT project that was done over the last 2 years, there's new sidewalk along 114, as well as fencing, lighting, banner poles. There's an existing stone wall along that section as well. So we would like to increase the aesthetic portion of this part of campus as part of this parking project. The other elements of the application related to traffic and vehicle patterns. We talked about vehicle patterns. Our vehicle patterns don't necessarily change going through this area. What we do introduce is obviously a new parking lot by itself on the upper part of this plan. We also talk about traffic generation in the memo. We are not adding, this is still a campus. We're not adding any new uses or any additional buildings as part of this project. So traffic generation remains as is.
Are there any new exits or entrances on
No,
114?
there's
Okay,
no
great.
new entrances or exits off Route 114, or Elm Street, or off of 125. That all remains.
Okay.
In terms of snow storage, we have areas to the left of this plan and to the right of this plan, as well as areas next to Sullivan Hall that we traditionally use for snow storage. During really bad storms, we've trucked off snow to basically a snow bank across 114 that we have. So we have ample area for snow removal as needed for this project. We've also coordinated, I think Monica has provided plans to both police and fire, and I believe all those comments came through. I have not seen them. I assume they were relatively positive, but we're happy to address any comments that may have been raised through those letters as well.
And you've submitted to Andover Concom?
Yep, so Andover Concom reviews our projects under a stormwater master plan that is governed under the Andover Conservation Commission. So any project we do, whether it's in Andover or North Andover, the drainage and the stormwater design, as well as the impact to our stormwater bank, is thoroughly reviewed by peer review and Andover Conservation Commission. So typically, what happens in this process here is this board usually says, okay, if their peer review for drainage is satisfactory, then we as a planning board is satisfactory. We can discuss that if you'd like. We've also, as part of that process, they have an environmental monitor that is on site as time needed, particular after storms, just to see how we're doing from a stormwater protection standpoint. So that typically becomes a shared monitor. We would be pursuing. We would like to entertain that as well.
Okay.
But we had our first hearing in Andover tonight, and we'll have to go back to them. We're undergoing that peer review process now, and over the next couple of weeks, we expect to hear from that and hopefully be through with it.
Okay. Are there any members of the public that have anything they want to say on this public hearing? Okay. Any members of the board have questions, comments?
Olivia, can you remind us again, just sort of what, if any, kind of drainage you had to do, changing the drainage, or to put facilities in for this?
This is Jeff Kedowitz from VHB.
You would have been disappointed if you didn't get to speak.
Jeff Kedowitz with VHB, we're the civil engineers. So the project includes substantial drainage improvements. The existing drainage system is severely undersized. So we ran hydraulic calculations, and we'll actually be upsizing the pipe network within the lot. And you can see off to the left there, slightly downstream, we're chasing the existing drain line to make sure that it's adequate for the design storms. Ultimately, this lot is tributary to the Elm Street Basin, which is in Andover. It's under the stormwater bank. But we're also doing some on-site stormwater treatments. There's a surface bioretention basin in the middle that'll provide water quality treatment for the pavement runoff, a little bit of storage, but not a ton of attenuation. Most of that's in the existing basin. And we have a couple structural water quality units as well to make sure that we're meeting the Mass DEP stormwater regulations.
Topography-wise,
Yeah.
this parking lot sits below the roadway.
Correct, yep.
So you won't have a situation where you're flowing under 114.
Can you just remind me, we looked at this a couple of years ago when you were building the extra buildings, but the campus drains under Elm Street, is that right?
Correct, yeah.
And where does it cross Elm Street?
I apologize, I don't have a larger arrow.
Ross's, oh, there you go.
Right across from the,
Yeesh.
Zoom in on that a little bit.
So I'm sorry, right across from where?
across from the campus entrance on Elm Street.
So I'm just gonna pull that up here so I can see.
Wall.
Find a laser pointer quick. Yeah, it's basically across from the main entrance. Like when you come into campus, that's where all that infrastructure to the Elm Street Basin goes.
There's a 48-inch drain line that was put in under that, the North Campus project, which is essentially what we're extending to with our upsizing now. And that's what runs under Elm Street.
And when you say the main entrance, is that Flaherty Road?
Yes.
Yep. Yep.
And then where is the town line relative to that?
It's just north of Flaherty Road, or south, I'm sorry.
The town line is south of Flaherty.
So if you think about it,
Here's what I'm getting at. Just remind me, in terms of our questions about stormwater and Andover Concom and reviewing that, where it leaves the campus under Elm Street, is it draining under Elm Street in North Andover or Andover?
I believe it's Andover.
I believe it's Andover as well. Because the entrance itself, the curb cut into campus is actually in Andover.
And that's where the drain goes
That's where the
under?
drain line is.
Okay, so maybe you could just check that, since you're saying
Yeah, we
that
can
you believe.
supplement
Yeah,
that, yep.
yeah, great, thanks. Is that okay to ask that?
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's fine.
That's been my understanding from the couple times they've been here before,
Yeah.
is that the agreement with the Andover Concom is because it flows into Andover.
Well,
And everything from that, the basin itself across the way on
Right.
our 25 acres is in Andover.
Okay.
And then what leads out of that, the structure, the outflow goes down into Andover as well.
right, okay. Is that a burden to check that?
No, not at all.
No, we
Okay.
could do a little map and.
Great, thank
send
you.
them on to the
Thank you.
district.
And he's supplying us with the stormwater report.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll have those. Okay, anybody else? So could we get a motion to close the public hearing?
You want to keep, are we going to vote tonight?
I think we're gonna vote tonight. If people are comfortable, we have a draft decision.
Oh, we do? Okay.
Yeah.
Good,
Yep. Yeah, and I don't think there's any more information we're gonna need, so. Yeah.
Supporting the movement of the fire hydrants and the circulation. Conservation reviewed, they said they'd like erosion controls outside of the buffer zone and silt sacks in all the catch basins. There were no other comments, no other concerns.
And is that addressed in the decision?
It is.
Okay. So we get a motion to close the public hearing?
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
we'll close the,
315 Turnpike Street.
all right.
I'll
Site-
second.
All right. Motion has been made and seconded to close the public hearing as to the site plan review special permit for 315 Turnpike Street. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, public hearing is closed. We're gonna review. You guys can have a seat if you want.
Thank you very much.
Finding of fact number 9 says the use as developed will not adversely affect the neighborhood as the property is located entirely within the campus of Merrimack College. So I don't have a problem with the notion that the use as developed will not adversely affect the neighborhood. I agree with that. But I'm not sure that I like the qualifier as the property is located entirely within the campus, because there could be other things that are entirely within the campus which could affect the outside. And so I think I'd just be more comfortable with that the use as developed will not, the use as developed and described within the plan will not adversely affect the neighborhood. I wouldn't want to give carte blanche to do anything and just say, just because it's on campus, it's not going to affect the neighborhood. The use is developed and described in the permit, in the permit application and plans will not adversely affect the neighborhood, period.
Another point on A, I think what you have there is fine, but I would just sort of add to it that, you know, in light of the discussion, like the question I ask is that they're improving the drainage structures and they'll be reviewed by the town of Andover, so that they're actually making drainage improvements.
So the applicant plans to make drainage improvements, and such improvements will be reviewed by the town of Andover and submitted to the town of North Andover Planning Department. Could be all part of number 8.
Yeah.
It's a long one, that's okay. For 13, we just say the police department has reviewed the project. Hydrants shall be Eddy-style open left. What does that mean?
It's the second time someone, like 2 years ago, someone made the same comment in another decision. It's just such a specific,
Yeah.
you know.
Does anyone know what that?
It's not open right, it's open left. It's
Is that
very important.
Drainage civil engineer.
Yeah.
Hydrant shall be Eddy-style open left. Do you know what that means?
That is the hydrant model, the Eddy Cloud, DPW requires.
Right. So I do know that.
I'm sorry, I stopped paying.
Yeah, I do know that oftentimes towns for fire hydrants do require, and you can even bid that it be a specific style, so that you have all the same, so that if you do need to replace them, you can have spare parts that you don't have to get. Even if new ones might be better, it's sometimes easier to have the same ones. I didn't know that was the name.
The town of Andover, so some of the water system is actually still on, mixed between Andover and North Andover system, and I think valves on the Andover system open different ways, so it's important to identify each of those, so that someone coming out to open up those,
Okay, see?
clockwise, counterclockwise.
Okay. Eddy style open left. Sounds like a football play formation. On three, on three.
You'll see that looking back some of the
Yeah.
other decisions that's specified there, so that seems to be standard issue
Okay.
on the site.
Yeah.
Sorry for zoning out there.
That's okay.
My fault.
Anybody else, anything else? Okay, does someone want to make a motion to grant the site plan review special permit?
I'll
As
make a
amended.
motion to approve the application for a special permit site plan review as amended for 315 Turnpike Street.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for jumping through our hoops. Okay, Woodlands Inn has sent us an invitation, invited to Edgewood for the grand opening of the Woodlands Inn. I will be on vacation next week, but hopefully somebody, either from the town or from the board, can make it. So just, can we get a motion to place that invitation on file?
I'll make a motion to place the invitation on file.
All in favor? Aye.
Those hors d'oeuvres will be served with that cocktails.
BYO.
Yeah. Meeting minutes, motion to approve the minutes from June 5th.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from June 5th.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody else, anything else to add? Okay,
Yes, dock number 12 is now on the lake.
excellent.
Not necessarily.
Not excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you for the news. Commentary or just?
Big news. I think Conservation's taken a look, because it was not known that it was going on the lake, and there was no parent application or...
Whose
Where
dock,
does this have to
whose
do
dock
with you
is
said
it?
at the beginning?
Another dock is on the lake.
Oh, a dock. Oh, that. Ah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Our former holder of the Best Practices Award for, for shoreside management.
Oh.
Yeah,
Okay, to be continued.
yeah.
All right, motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.